Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of Flow by Mihaly C. I call him Mr. C. Mr. C, because I don't know how to pronounce his name. Anyways, this book was inspired by an animated film I saw with the same name, Flow. It's a really good film, so check it out. I don't think it has any association with the book and the movie. I don't think they have any association, but I thought it would be kind of fun to read the book since I've seen the movie. Anyways, today we are reading chapter 5, and this will be part 1. And there are certain areas where I highlighted words or phrases. That means there is a footnote in the back of the book, and we will be reading that as well. Okay, so chapter 5, the body of flow. And you know what? Let me move the camera in a little bit. If you have a book, you could follow with us in your book, or you could follow the reading here on Zoom. Whatever works for you. All right. A man possesses nothing, certainly save a brief loan of his own body, wrote J.B. Cabell. Cabell. Okay, sorry, butchered that one. Yet the body of man is capable of much curious pleasure. When we are unhappy, depressed, or bored, we have an essay. Sorry, didn't have enough coffee today. Getting it on a rough start. When we are unhappy, depressed, or bored, we have an easy remedy at hand: to use the body for all it is worth. Most people nowadays are aware of the importance of health and physical fitness, but the almost unlimited potential for enjoyment that the body offers often remains unexploited. Few learn to move with the grace of an acrobat, see with the fresh eye of an artist, feel the joy of an athlete who breaks his own record, taste with the subtlety of a connoisseur, or love with a skill that lifts sex into a form of art. Because these opportunities are easily within reach, the easiest step toward improving the quality of life consists in simply learning to control the body and its senses. Scientists occasionally amuse themselves by trying to figure out how much a human body might be worth. Chemists have painstakingly added up the market value of skin, flesh, bone, hair, and the various minerals and trace elements contained in it, and have come up with the paltry sum of a few dollars. Other scientists have taken into account the sophisticated information processing and learning capacity of the mind-body system and have come to a very different conclusion. They calculate that to build such a sensitive machine would require an enormous sum, on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars. And yet Mother Nature gives this to us for free. Isn't that interesting? Neither of these methods of assessing the body makes much sense. Its worth does not derive from chemical ingredients or from the neural wiring that makes information processing possible. What gives it a preciousness beyond reckoning is the fact that without it, there would be no experiences and therefore no record of life as we know it. Trying to attach a market value to the body and its processes is the same as attempting to put a price tag on life. By what scale can we establish its worth? It's priceless. We can't put a price tag on it. Everything the body can do is potentially enjoyable, yet many people ignore this capacity and use their physical equipment as little as possible, leaving its ability to provide flow unexploited. When left undeveloped, the senses give us chaotic information. An untrained body moves in random and clumsy ways. An insensitive eye presents ugly or uninteresting sights. The unmusical ear mainly hears jarring noises. The coarse palate knows only insipid tastes. If the functions of the body are left to atrophy, the quality of life becomes merely adequate. and for some, even dismal. But if one takes control of what the body can do and learns to impose order on physical sensations, entropy yields to a sense of enjoyable harmony in consciousness. The human body is capable of hundreds of separate functions: seeing, hearing, touching, running, swimming, throwing, catching, climbing up mountains, and climbing down caves, to name only a few. And to each of these, there correspond flow experiences. In every culture, enjoyable activities have been invented to suit the potentialities of the body. When a normal physical function like running is performed in a socially designed, goal-directed setting with rules that offer challenges and require skills, it turns into a flow activity. Whether jogging alone, racing the clock, running against competition, or like the Tarahumara Indians of Mexico, who race hundreds of miles in the mountains during certain festivals, adding an elaborate ritual dimension to the activity, the simple act of moving the body across space becomes a source of complex feedback that provides optimal experience and adds strength to the self. Each sensory organ, each motor function can be harnessed to the production of flow. And there's a footnote about the Tarahumara Indians. Let's see here. Okay. The Tarahumara festivals that include ritual foot races up and down the mountains of northern Mexico for hundreds of miles are described in Lumholtz, 1902, 1987, and Nabokov, 1981. An account of the ritual elements involved in modern sports is given by McAloon's 1981 study of the modern Olympics. Before exploring further how physical activity contributes to optimal experience, it should be stressed that the body does not produce flow merely by its movements. The mind is always involved as well. To get enjoyment from swimming, for instance, one needs to cultivate a set of appropriate skills, which requires the concentration of attention. Without the relevant thoughts, motives, and feelings, it would be impossible to achieve the discipline necessary to learn to swim well enough to enjoy it. Moreover, because enjoyment takes place in the mind of the swimmer, flow cannot be a purely physical process. Muscles and brain must be equally involved. In the pages that follow, we shall review some of the ways that the quality of experience can be improved through the refined use of bodily processes. These include physical activities like sports and dance, the cultivation of sexuality, and the various Eastern disciplines for controlling the mind through the training of the body. They also feature the discriminating use of the senses of sight, hearing, and taste. Each of these modalities offers an almost unlimited amount of enjoyment, but only to persons who work to develop the skills they require. To those who do not, the body remains indeed a lump of rather inexpensive flesh. Higher, faster, stronger. The Latin motto of the modern Olympic Games, Altius Citius Fortius, is a good, if incomplete, summary of how the body can experience flow. It encompasses the rationale of all sports, which is to do something better than it has ever been done before. The purest form of athletes and sports in general is to break through the limitations of what the body can accomplish. However unimportant an athletic goal may appear to the outsider, it becomes a serious affair when performed with the intent of demonstrating a perfection of skill. Throwing things, for instance, is a rather trivial ability. Even small babies are quite good at it, as the toys surrounding any infant's crib testify. But how far a person can throw an object of a certain weight becomes a matter of legend. The Greeks invented the discus, and the great discus throwers of antiquity were immortalized by the great sculptors. The Swiss gathered on holidays in mountain meadows to see who could toss the trunk of a tree farthest. The Scots did the same with gigantic rocks. In baseball nowadays, pitchers become rich and famous because they can throw balls with speed and precision, and basketball players because they can sink them into hoops. Some athletes throw javelins, others are bowlers, spot shot putters, or hammer throwers. Some throw boomerangs or cast fishing lines. Each of these variations on the basic capacity to throw offers almost unlimited opportunities for enjoyment. Altius, higher, is the first word of the Olympic model, and soaring above the ground is another universally recognized challenge. To break the bonds of gravity is one of the oldest dreams of mankind. The myth of Icarus, who had wings fashioned so he could reach the sun, has been long held to be a parable of the aims, notable and misguided, at the same time of civilization itself. To jump higher, to climb the loftiest peaks, to fly far above the earth are among the most enjoyable activities people can do. Yet, some savants have recently invented a special psychic infirmity, the so-called Icarus complex, to account for this desire to be released from the pull of gravity. Like all explanations that try to reduce enjoyment to a defensive ploy against repressed anxieties, this one misses the point. Of course, in some sense, all purposeful action can be regarded as a defense against the threats of chaos. But in that respect, it is more worthwhile to consider acts that bring enjoyment as signs of health, not of disease. There's a footnote on Icarus complex. Okay, the Icarus complex was explored by Henry A. Murray, 1955. At this point, it might be appropriate to confront squarely. Oh boy, this is a long footnote. Okay. The Freudian concept of sublimation, a topic that, if bypassed, might leave us with the nagging feeling of an unresolved problem. Superficial application of Freud's thought might have superficial applications of Freud's thought have led many people to interpret any action that is not directed to the satisfaction of basic sexual desires either as a defense when it aims to hold back an unacceptable wish that otherwise might be expressed, or as a sublimation when an acceptable goal is substituted for a desire that could not be safely expressed in its original form. At best, sublimation is a poor substitute for the unsatisfied pleasure it helps to disguise. For example, Bergler 1970 has argued that games involving risk provide a release from guilt about sexuality and aggression. According to the Icarus complex, a high jumper is trying to escape from the ties of an Oedipal tangle in a socially acceptable way, but without really resolving the basic conflict that motivates his actions. Similarly, Jones, 1931, and Fine, 1956, have explained chess as a way of coping with castration anxiety. To mate the opponent's king with the help of one's queen is a sublimated enactment of the father's castration with the collusion of the mother. And mountain climbing has been explained as sublimated penis envy. Nobody seems to do anything according to this point of view, except to resolve a festering childhood anxiety. The logical consequence of reducing motivation to a search for pleasure that is instigated by a few basic genetically programmed desires, however, is a failure to account for much of the behavior that differentiates humans from other animal species. To illustrate this, it is useful to examine the role of enjoyment in an evolutionary perspective. Life is shaped as much by the future as it is by the past. The first fish to leave the sea for dry land were not programmed to do so, but exploited unused potentials in their makeup to take advantage of the opportunities of an entirely new environment. The monkeys who use sticks to fish for ants at the mouth of anthills are not following a destiny carved in their genes, but are experimenting with possibilities that in the future may lead to the conscious use of tools and hence to what we call progress. And certainly, human history can only be understood as the action of people striving to realize indistinct dreams. It is not a question of teleology, the belief that our actions are the unfolding of a preordained destiny, because teleology is also a mechanistic concept. The goals we pursue are not determined in advance or built into our makeup. They are discovered in the process of enjoying the extension of our skills in novel settings, in new environments. Enjoyment seems to be the mechanism that natural selection has provided to ensure that we will evolve and become more complex. This argument has been made in Mr. C and Massimini, 1985, I, Mr. C, 1988, and M, C, Mr. C, 1988. The evolutionary implications of flow were also perceived by Crook, 1980. Just as pleasure from eating makes us want to eat more, and pleasure from physical love makes us want to have sex, both of which we need to do in order to survive and reproduce. Enjoyment, it motivates us to do things that push us beyond the present and into the future. It makes no sense to assume that only the pursuit of pleasure is the only source of natural desires, and any other motivation must be its pale derivative. The rewards of reaching new goals are just as genuine as the rewards of satisfying old needs. Low experiences based on the use of physical skills do not occur only in the context of outstanding athletic feats. Olympians do not have an exclusive gift of finding enjoyment in pushing performance beyond existing boundaries. Every person, no matter how unfit he or she is, can rise a little higher, go a little faster, and grow to be a little stronger. The joy of surpassing the limits of the body is open to all. Even the simplest physical act becomes enjoyable when it is transformed so as to produce flow. The essential steps in this process are A, to set an overall goal and as many sub goals as are realistically feasible. B, to find ways of measuring progress in terms of the goals chosen. C, to keep concentrating on what one is doing and to keep making finer and finer distinctions in the challenges involved in the activity. D, to develop the skills necessary to interact with the opportunities available, and E, to keep raising the stakes if the activity becomes boring. A good example of this method is the act of walking, which is as simple a use of the body as one can imagine, yet which can become a complex flow activity, almost an art form. A great number of different goals might be set for a walk. For instance, the choice of the itinerary, where one wishes to go and by what route. Within the overall route, one might select places to stop or certain landmarks to see. Another goal may be to develop a personal style, a way to move the body easily and efficiently. An economy of motion that maximizes physical well-being is another obvious goal. For measuring progress, the feedback may include how fast and how easily the intended distance was covered, how many interesting sights one has seen, and how many new ideas or feelings were entertained along the way. The challenges of the activity are what force us to concentrate. The challenges of a walk will vary greatly depending on the environment. For those who live in large cities, flat sidewalks and right angle layouts make the physical act of walking easy. Walking on a mountain trail is another thing altogether. For a skilled hiker, each step represents a different challenge to be resolved with a choice of the most efficient foothold that will give the best leverage, simultaneously taking into account the momentum that the center of gravity of the body and the various surfaces, dirt, rocks, roots, grass, branches, on which the foot can land. On a difficult trail, an experienced hiker walks with economy of motion and lightness, and the constant adjustment of our steps to the terrain reveals a highly sophisticated process of selecting the best solution to the changing series of complex equations involving mass, velocity, and friction. Of course, these calculations are usually automatic and give the impression of being entirely intuitive, almost instinctive. But if the walker does not process the right information about the terrain and fails to make the appropriate adjustments to her gait, she will stumble or will soon grow old, grow tired. So while this kind of walking might be entirely unself-conscious, it is in fact a highly intense activity that requires concentrated attention. In the city, the terrain itself is not challenging, but there are other opportunities for developing skills. The social stimulation of the crowds, the historical and architectural references of the urban milieu that add enormous variety to a walk. There are store windows to see, people to observe, patterns of human interaction to reflect on. Some walkers specialize in choosing the shortest routes, others the most interesting ones. Some pride themselves in walking the same route with chronometric precision. Others like to mix and match their itinerary. In winter, some aim to walk as long as possible on the sunny stretches of the sidewalk and to walk as much in the shade as possible in the summer. There are those who time their crossings exactly for when the traffic lights change to green. For, of course, these changes for enjoyment. Of course, these chances for enjoyment must be cultivated. They don't just happen automatically to those who do not control their itinerary. Unless one sets goals and develops skills, walking is just featureless drudgery. Walking is the most trivial physical activity imaginable, yet it can be profoundly enjoyable if a person sets goals and takes control of the process. On the other hand, the hundreds of sophisticated forms of sport and body culture currently available, ranging from racquetball to yoga, from bicycling to martial arts, may not be enjoyable at all if one approaches them with the attitude that one must take part in them because they are fashionable or simply because they are good for one's health. Many people get caught up in a treadmill of physical activity over which they end up having little control, feeling duty bound to exercise, but not having any fun doing it. They have made the usual mistake of confounding form and substance and assume that concrete actions and events are the only reality that determines what they experience. For such individuals, joining a fancy health club should be almost a guarantee that they will enjoy themselves. However, enjoyment, as we have seen, does not depend on what you do, but rather on how you do it. In one of our studies, we addressed the following question. Are people happier when they use more material resources in their leisure activities? I'd say not necessarily. Or are they happier when they invest more of themselves? When they invest more of themselves, I think. That's my opinion. We tried to answer these questions with the experience sampling method, ESM, the procedure I developed at the University of Chicago to study the quality of experience. As described earlier, this method consists in giving people electronic pagers or beepers or a booklet of response sheets. A radio transmitter is programmed to send signals about 8 times a day at random intervals for a week. Each time the pager signals, respondents fill out a page of the booklet indicating where they are and what they're doing and with whom, and rating their state of mind on a variety of dimensions, such as 7-point scale, ranging from very happy to very sad. What we found was that when people were pursuing leisure activities that were expensive in terms of the outside resources required, activities that demanded expensive equipment or electricity or other forms of energy measured in BTUs, such as power boating, driving, or watching television, they were significantly less happy than when involved in inexpensive leisure. People were happiest when they were just talking to one another, when they gardened, knitted, or were involved in a hobby. All of these activities require few material resources, but they demand a relatively high investment of psychic energy. Leisure that uses up external resources, however, often requires less attention, and as a consequence, it generally provides less memorable rewards. Okay. Okay, the study of the relationship between happiness and energy consumption was reported in Graf, Gionino, and Mr. C, 1981. The joys of movement. Sports and fitness are not the only media of physical experience that use the body as a source of enjoyment. For in fact, a broad range of activities rely on rhythmic or harmonious movements to generate flow. Among these, dance is probably the oldest and the most significant, both for its universal appeal and because of its potential complexity. From the most isolated New Guinea tribe to the polished troops of the Bolshoi Ballet, the response of the body to music is widely practiced as a way of improving the quality of experience. Older people may consider dancing at clubs a bizarre and senseless ritual, but many teenagers find it an important source of enjoyment. Here is how some of the dancers describe the sensation of moving on the floor. Once I get into it, then I just float along, having fun, just feeling myself moving around. I get sort of a physical high from it. I get very sweaty, very feverish, or sort of ecstatic when everything is going really well. You move about and try to express yourself in terms of those motions. That's where it's at. It's a body language kind of communicative medium in a way. When it's going good, I'm really expressing myself in in terms of the music and in terms of the people that are out there. The enjoyment of dancing is often so intense that people will give up many other options for its sake. Here is a typical statement from one of the dancers interviewed by Professor Massimini's group in Milan, Italy. From the very first, I wanted to become a professional ballerina. It has been hard, little money, lots of traveling, and my mother always complains about my work. But love of the dance was has always sustained me. It is now part of my life, a part of me that I could not live without. In this group of 60 professional dancers of marriageable age, only 3 were married and only 1 had a child. Pregnancy was seen as too great an interference with a career. Wow. The US dancers' quotations are from Mr. C, 1975, page 104. The Italian dancers is from Del Fave and Massimini, 1988, page 202. Oh, cultivation of sexuality. Did I read that? No, I did not. Okay, it's the next paragraph or the next section. So we'll do that. But just as with athletics, one certainly need not become a professional to enjoy controlling the expressive potentials of the body. Dilettante dancers can have just as much fun without sacrificing every other goal for the sake of feeling themselves moving harmoniously. And there are other forms of expression that use the body as an instrument, miming and acting, for instance. The popularity of charades as a parlor game is due to the fact that it allows people to shed, for a time, their customary identity and act out different roles. Even the most silly and clumsy impersonation can provide an enjoyable relief from the limitations of everyday patterns of behavior, a glimpse into alternative modes of being. Sex as flow. When people think of enjoyment, usually one of the first things that comes to mind is sex. This is not surprising because sexuality is certainly one of the most universally rewarding experiences, surpassed in its power to motivate perhaps only by the need to survive, to drink, and to eat. The urge to have sex is so powerful that it can drain psychic energy away from other necessary goals. Therefore, every culture has to invest great efforts in rechanneling and restraining it, and many complex social institutions exist only in order to regulate this urge. The saying that love makes the world go round is a polite reference to the fact that most of our deeds are impelled either directly or indirectly by sexual needs. We wash, dress, and comb our hair to be attractive. Many of us go to work so as to afford keeping a partner and a household. We struggle for status and power in part so as to be admired and loved. Okay, let's read the footnote here. The cultivation of sexuality, an excellent historical review of Western ideas about love and of the behaviors that accompanied it, is given in the 3 volumes of The Nature of Love by Irving Singer, 1981. A compendium of contemporary psychologists' views on love was collected by Kenneth Pope, 1980. A very recent statement on the subject is by the Yale psychologist Robert Sternberg, 1988, who expands the classical description of love as eros or as agape to 3 components: intimacy, passion, and commitment. Lisa Dalby, 1983, an American anthropologist who spent a few hours training as a geisha in Kyoto, gives a good description of the refinements involved in the Far Eastern approach to sexuality. For the lack of romance in antiquity, see what? Vaini. Sorry, butchered that name. 1987. What's ESP? Especially page 202 and 205, I think. Okay. Okay. But is sex always enjoyable? No, not always. By now, the reader might be able to guess that the answer depends on what happens in the consciousness of those involved. Excuse me. The same sexual act can be experienced as painful, revolting, frightening, neutral, pleasant, pleasurable, enjoyable, or ecstatic, depending on how it is linked to a person's goals. A rape may not be distinguishable physically from a loving encounter, but their psychological effects are worlds apart. It is safe to say that sexual stimulation in and of itself is generally pleasurable. That we are genetically programmed to derive pleasure from sexuality is evolution's rather clever way of guaranteeing that individuals will engage in activities likely to lead to procreation, thus ensuring the survival of the species. To take pleasure in sex, one needs only to be healthy and willing. No special skills are required, and soon after the first experiences, few new physical challenges arise again. But like other pleasures, unless it is transformed into an enjoyable activity, sex easily becomes boring with time. It turns from a genuinely positive experience into either a meaningless ritual or an addictive experience or addictive dependence. Fortunately, there are many ways to make sex enjoyable. Eroticism is one form of cultivating sexuality that focuses on the development of physical skills. In a sense, eroticism is to sex as sport is to physical activity. The Kama Sutra, The Joy of Sex, are 2 examples of manuals that aim to foster eroticism by providing suggestions and goals to help make sexual activity more varied, more interesting, and challenging. Most cultures have elaborate systems of erotic training and performance, often overlaid with religious meanings. Early fertility rites, the Dionysian mysteries of Greece, and the recurring connection between prostitution and female priesthood are just a few forms of this phenomenon. It is as if in the early stages of religion, cultures co-opted Cultures co-opted the obvious attraction of sexuality and used it as a basis on which to build more complex ideas and patterns of behavior. But the real cultivation of sexuality begins only when the psychological dimensions are added to the purely physical. According to historians, the art of love was a recent development in the West. With rare exceptions, there was very little romance in the sexual practices of the Greeks and the Romans. The wooing, the sharing of feelings between lovers, the promises and the courtship rituals that now seem to be such indispensable attributes of intimate relations were only invented in the late Middle Ages by the troubadours who plied the castles of southern France. And then, as a sweet new style, they were adopted by the affluent classes in the rest of Europe. Romance, the rituals of wooing first developed in the Romance region of southern France, provides an entire new range of challenges to lovers. For those who learn the skills necessary to meet them, it becomes not only pleasurable but enjoyable as well. A similar refinement of sexuality took place in other civilizations and roughly in the same not too distant past. The Japanese created extremely sophisticated professionals of love, expecting their geishas to be accomplished musicians, dancers, actresses, as well as appreciative of poetry and art. Chinese and Italian courtesans and Turkish odalisques were equally skillful. Regrettably, this professionalism, while developing the potential complexity of sex to great heights, did little to improve directly the quality of experience for most people. Historically, romance seems to have been restricted to youth and to those who had the time and the money to indulge in it. The vast majority in any culture appear to have had a very humdrum sex life. Decent people the world over do not spend too much energy on the task of sexual reproduction or on the practices that have been built on it. Romance resembles sports in this respect as well. Instead of doing it personally, most people are content to hear about it or watch a few experts perform it. A third dimension of sexuality begins to emerge when, in addition to physical pleasure and the enjoyment of a romantic relationship, the lover feels genuine care for his partner. There are then new challenges one discovers to enjoy the partner as a unique person, to understand her and to help her fulfill her goals. With the emergence of this third dimension, sexuality becomes a very complex process, one that can go on providing flow experiences all through life. At first, it is very easy to obtain pleasure from sex and even to enjoy it. Any fool can fall in love when young. The first date, the first kiss, the first intercourse all present heady new challenges that keep the young person in flow for weeks on end. But for many, this ecstatic state occurs only once. After the first love, all later relationships are no longer as exciting. It is especially difficult to keep enjoying sex with the same partner over a period of years. It is probably true that humans, like the majority of mammalian species, are not monogamous by nature. It is impossible for partners not to grow bored unless they work to discover new challenges in each other's company and learn appropriate skills for enriching the relationship. Initially, physical challenges alone are enough to sustain flow, but unless romance and genuine care also develop, the relationship will grow stale. How to keep love fresh? The answer is the same as it is for any other activity. To be enjoyable, a relationship must become more complex. To become more complex, the partners must discover new potentialities in themselves and in each other. To discover these, they must invest attention in each other so that they can learn what thoughts and feelings, what dreams reside in their partner's mind. This in itself is a never-ending process, a lifetime's task. After one begins to really know another person, then many joint adventures become possible. Traveling together, reading the same books, raising children, making and realizing plans all become more enjoyable and more meaningful. The specific details are unimportant. Each person must find out which ones are relevant to his or her own situation. What is important is the general principle. The sexuality, like any other aspects of life, can be made enjoyable if we're willing to take control of it and cultivate it in the direction of greater complexity. The ultimate control. yoga, and martial arts. When it comes to learning to control the body and its experiences, we are as children compared to the great Eastern civilizations. In many respects, what the West has accomplished in terms of harnessing material energy is matched by what India and the Far East have achieved in terms of direct control of consciousness. That neither of these approaches is by itself an ideal program for the conduct of life is shown by the fact that the Indian fascination with advanced techniques for self-control at the expense of learning to cope with the material challenges of the physical environment has conspired to let impotence and apathy spread over a great proportion of the population, defeated by scarcity of resources and by overcrowding. The Western mastery over material energy, on the other hand, runs the risk of turning everything it touches into a resource to be consumed as rapidly as possible, thus exhausting the environment. The perfect society would be able to strike a healthy balance between the spiritual and material worlds. But short of aiming for perfection, we can look toward Eastern religions for guidance in how to achieve control over consciousness. Of the great Eastern methods for training the body, one of the oldest and most diffuse is the set of practices known as Hatha Yoga. It is worth reviewing some of its highlights because it corresponds in several areas to what we know about the psychology of flow. Therefore, it provides a useful model for anyone who wishes to be in better charge of psychic energy. Nothing quite like Hatha Yoga has ever been created in the West. The early monastic routines instituted by Saint Benedict and Saint Dominic, and especially the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, probably come the closest in offering a way to control attention by developing mental and physical routines. But even these fall far short of the rigorous discipline of yoga. In Sanskrit, yoga means yoking, which refers to the method's goal of joining the individual with God, first by uniting the various parts of the body with one another, then making the body as a whole work together with consciousness as part of an ordered system. To achieve this aim, the basic text of yoga, compiled by Patanjali about 1500 years ago, prescribes 8 stages of increasing skills. The first 2 stages of ethical preparation are intended to change a person's attitudes. We might say that they involve the straightening out of consciousness. They attempt to reduce psychic entropy as much as possible before the actual attempts at mental control begin. In practice, the first step, yama, requires that one achieve restraint from acts and thoughts that might harm others, falsehood, theft, lust, and avarice. The second step, niyama, involves obedience or the following of ordered routines in cleanliness, study, and obedience to God, all of which help to channel attention into predictable patterns and hence make attention easier to control. The next 2 stages involve physical preparation or development of habits that will enable the practitioner or yogin to overcome the demands of the senses and make it possible for him to concentrate without growing tired or distracted. The third stage consists in practicing various asana, ways of sitting or holding postures for long periods without succumbing to strain or fatigue. This is the stage of yoga that we all know in the West, exemplified by a fellow in what looks like diapers standing on his head with his shanks behind his neck. The fourth stage is pranayama or breath control, which aims to relax the body and stabilizes the rhythm of breathing. The fifth stage, the hinge between the preparatory exercises and the practice of yoga proper, is called pratyahara, withdrawal. It involves learning to withdraw attention from outward objects by directing the input of the senses, thus becoming able to see, hear, and feel only what one wishes to admit into awareness. Already at this stage, we see how close the goal of yoga is to that of the flow activities described in this volume, to achieve control over what happens in the mind. Although the remaining three stages do not properly belong to the present chapter, they involve the control of consciousness through purely mental operations. Rather than physical techniques, we shall discuss them here for the sake of continuity, and also because these mental practices are, after all, solidly based on the earlier physical ones. Dharana, or holding on, is the ability to concentrate for long periods on a single stimulus, and thus is the mirror image of the earlier stage of pratyahara. First, one learns to keep things out of the mind, then one learns to keep them in. Intense meditation, or dhyana, is the next step. Here, one learns to forget the self in uninterrupted concentration that no longer needs the external stimuli of the preceding phase. Finally, the yogin may achieve samadhi, the last stage of self-collectedness, when the meditator and the object of meditation become as one. Those who have achieved it describe samadhi as the most joyful experience in their lives. The similarities between yoga and flow are extremely strong. In fact, it makes sense to think of yoga as a very thoroughly planned flow activity. Both try to achieve a joyous, self-forgetful involvement through concentration, which in turn is made possible by a discipline of the body. Some critics, however, prefer to stress the differences between flow and yoga. Their main divergence is that whereas flow attempts to fortify the self, the goal of yoga and many other Eastern techniques is to abolish it. Samadhi, the last stage of yoga, is only the threshold for entering nirvana, where the individual self merges with the universal force like a river blending into the ocean. Therefore, it can be argued yoga and flow tend toward diametrically opposite outcomes. But this opposition may be more superficial than real. After all, 7 of the 8 stages of yoga involve building up increasingly higher levels of skill in controlling consciousness. Samadhi and the liberation that is supposed to follow it may not, in the end, be that significant. It may, in one sense, be regarded as the justification of the activity that takes place in the previous 7 stages, just as the peak of the mountain is important only because it justifies climbing, which is the real goal of the enterprise. Another argument favoring the similarity of the two processes is that even to the final stage of liberation, the yogin must maintain control over consciousness. He could not surrender his self unless he was, even at the very moment of surrender, in complete control of it. Giving up the self with its instincts, habits, and desires is so unnatural an act that only someone supremely in control can accomplish it. Therefore, it is not unreasonable to regard yoga as one of the oldest and most systematic methods for producing the flow experience. The details of how the experience is produced are unique to yoga, as they are unique to every other flow activity, from fly fishing to racing a Formula One car. As a product of cultural forces that occurred only once in history, the way of yoga bears the stamp of the time and place in which it was created. Whether yoga is a better way to foster optimal experience than others cannot be decided on its own merits alone. One must consider the opportunity cost involved in the practice and compare them with alternative options. Is the control that yoga makes possible worth the investment of psychic energy that learning its discipline requires? Another set of Eastern disciplines that have become popular recently in the West are the so-called martial arts. There are many variations of these, and each year a new one seems to arrive. Excuse me. They include judo, jiu-jitsu, kung fu, karate, taekwondo, aikido, tai chi chuan, all forms of unarmed combat, that originated in China, and Kendo, fencing, Kyodo, archery, and ninjutsu, which are more closely associated with Japan. These martial arts were influenced by Taoism and by Zen Buddhism, and thus they also emphasize consciousness controlling skills. Instead of focusing exclusively on physical performance as Western martial arts do, the Eastern varieties directed toward improving the mental and spiritual state of the practitioner. The warrior strives to reach the point where he can act with lightning speed against opponents without having to think or reason about the best defensive or offensive moves to make. Those who can perform it well claim that fighting becomes a joyous artistic performance, during which the everyday experience of duality between mind and body is transformed into a harmonious one-pointedness of mind. Here again, it seems appropriate to think of the martial arts as a specific form of flow. Okay, we will stop here for now, and we'll continue next time with chapter 5. I hope you enjoyed that. In the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day and a great week. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.